Barron had never liked programs that felt like performative charity, the kind where privileged kids walked into dark places for a photo, a report, a sense of moral superiority. And when his university's social justice committee announced a prison visitation project called Second Chance, that's exactly what he thought it was until something inside him stirred. A voice, a question, one he couldn't quiet. What if someone was in there because of a decision my father made? He didn't speak it aloud, but the thought clung to him like dust on his coat. A week later, he found himself walking through cold, metal gates into a federal correctional facility outside D.C. A clipboard in his hand listed his assigned name: Romero David, age 29, sentence 25 years. Charges: narcotics trafficking. The small note below caught his eye. His chest tightened. A corrections officer greeted him with a neutral nod. "You'll be in visitor room C. You've got an hour." "Okay, thank you," Barron replied, his voice thinner than usual. He stepped into the room. One plastic chair, one table, one man already seated. David Romero wasn't what Barron had expected. No tattoos, no glare. He wore the orange jumpsuit like it was a second skin, something he'd long ago stopped noticing. His hands were folded neatly, and his eyes were the first thing Barron couldn't look away from. Calm, still, but holding something ancient, as if they had watched the world abandon him. "You're Barron Trump," the man said. "Not accusatory, just a fact." "I'm Barron," he answered, "but I'm not here because of who I'm related to. I volunteered for this. I wanted to hear your story." Romero smiled faintly. "That's not why I brought it up. I just needed to be sure you knew who I was talking to," he replied. Barron sat down slowly, placing the clipboard under his chair. "So, David, where should we start?" he asked. The inmate leaned back slightly, eyes still steady. "You ever lose everyone you love in a single week?" he asked. Barron hesitated. "No, I haven't. I've lost people, but not like that," he answered. "I was 19, David began, voice low but firm. "My mom, my little brother and I were living in Arizona. No papers, but we were clean. I worked nights at a car wash, tried to stay off the radar. Then came the ICE raids. Everyone in our apartment complex was taken, except me. I wasn't home. I came back to an empty place and a letter taped to the door. Deportation pending." Barron's breath caught. "That was the zero-tolerance policy my father's administration," he murmured. David nodded. "It wasn't just policy, it was a machine. I got desperate. Started running packages for a guy. Money was fast, no questions asked. 3 months later, I was caught. I didn't even know what was in the duffel bag," he said quietly. Barron looked down at his hands. "And the sentence?" he asked. 25 years. First-time offender. Nonviolent. No priors. They wanted to make an example of someone," David answered. Barron didn't speak. He couldn't. The silence between them thickened, not awkward, but heavy. Truth had a way of doing that. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," David said, finally breaking the silence. "I'm telling you because when people like your father sign papers, real people bleed. They disappear. They don't come back." Barron's voice was barely audible. "I never thought I'd meet someone who lived on the other end of one of those decisions," he admitted. David leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Well, now you have. And I want to ask you something, Barron," he said. Barron met his gaze. "Ask me anything," he said. "If you ever have power," David said, his voice steady. "Real power, will you remember this room? Will you remember me?" he asked. Barron swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "I won't forget," he promised. But he wondered. Deep down, was that enough? Barron couldn't sleep that night. The image of David's face, calm but scarred, dignified yet buried, kept returning. He stared at the ceiling of his dorm room, wondering how many people like David he'd never meet. People with lives rewritten by policies, debated in polished rooms, far away from the sound of real consequence. 2 days later, Barron requested a second visit. This time, David wasn't sitting quietly. He stood when Barron entered, as if surprised he'd returned. "I didn't think you would come back," David said. "I didn't think I could stay away," Barron answered. They sat. I was serious about what I said, David began. About remembering. I know, Barron replied. That's why I'm here. I needed to understand more. Not just your story, but how we let it happen. How so many people looked away. David smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. We were easy to forget, he said. No one votes thinking about the guy mopping floors at night. They vote thinking about security, strength, patriotism. That's how the walls get built in people's minds first. Barron leaned forward. Do you blame us? Me? My family? David paused. I used to, he admitted. But anger, real anger, it doesn't burn forever. It starts to rot. You learn to carry something else. Not hate, just memory. There was a long silence between them, and then Barron said something he hadn't expected to say. I think I spent most of my life afraid to ask hard questions, he said. I grew up in rooms where answers came quickly, where doubt was weakness. But this talking to you, it makes me want to ask everything. David looked at him carefully. Like what? Barron hesitated, then asked, Do you believe justice exists in this country? David chuckled, but there was no joy in it. That's a question with teeth, he said. I think justice exists, but not for everyone, not equally. Justice in America is like a door with different keys, and the one I had didn't fit. Barron nodded slowly. So what do I do, David? If I can't change what's been done, what can I change? He asked. David looked him dead in the eye. Start by listening. Keep coming back. Talk to more of us. Don't turn us into symbols. We're people. Broken maybe, but not invisible. Make sure we're seen. Barron leaned back in his chair, digesting every word. I didn't come here to fix anything, he said, but maybe I can carry something from this. Maybe I can build something different someday. David nodded. Good, he said simply. But then his tone shifted. A memory surfaced. You know the worst part? David asked, voice suddenly distant. What? Barron responded. It wasn't the sentence or the cell. It was knowing that somewhere out there, my little brother is still alive. Maybe in Honduras, maybe on the street. And I might never see him again, David said, his voice cracking. Barron's throat tightened. I'm sorry, he whispered. David looked away, but then forced a faint smile. Don't be. Just carry it with you. That's all I ask, he replied. Barron stood to leave. I will, he said quietly. And as he walked back through the metal gates, something inside him, something that had been dormant for years, began to awaken. Not guilt, not shame, but a responsibility far deeper than a social justice project could ever measure. The next week, Barron walked into the university law library with a stack of folders under his arm. Not his usual setting, he wasn't a law student, but something had shifted after those visits. He had asked the prison warden for David Romero's case file. Surprisingly, it had been granted. As he sat alone at a quiet table, he flipped through the pages. U.S. versus David Romero. The transcript was brutal. The public defender barely spoke. The prosecution framed David not as a desperate youth, but as a cartel proxy. The judge referenced sending a message. 25 years, no parole, no review, just a signature. Barron read the words like they were written in stone, and then he saw it. Exhibit B, Executive Order 138-41 Presidential Directive on Border Prosecution, June 2018. His father's signature, right there. The loop of the D in Donald, the heavy stroke of the T in Trump. Barron sat still for a long time, staring. He had seen that signature his whole life on birthday cards, golf balls, the framed bill hanging in their Fifth Avenue apartment. But here it wasn't ceremonial. It was personal. It was power, made flesh. He whispered to himself, how many names did it touch? How many like David? The next morning, Barron returned to the prison. David was surprised again, but this time he didn't stand. He just looked at him and said, You've been digging. Barron nodded. I read your transcript. The court labeled you a trafficker, but they never mentioned your brother, or your mother, or that you were 19, scared and alone, he explained. David gave a slow smile. They don't write fear into legal documents, he said. Barron pulled out a folder. I brought something. I wrote a letter to a civil liberties group. They help re-examine extreme sentencing cases. I don't know if they'll take it, but I'm going to keep writing. Keep asking. David stared at him. Why are you doing this? He asked. Barron paused. Because this country has built systems that separate people from humanity, and I grew up in rooms that created those systems. Now I think I want to build rooms that do the opposite, he answered. David folded his hands again, the same way he had the first day they met. You know, he began, for the first time in years, I believe someone might remember my name after I'm gone. Not because of what I did, but because of who I was, he said quietly. Barron replied softly, You're not gone. You're still here. And I promise you when I speak, when I build, when I vote, I'll remember your name. They sat in silence for a moment. This time, it wasn't heavy, it was reverent. Then the buzzer sounded, time was up. As Barron stood, David extended his hand, not for a handshake, just an offering. Barron took it, and as the door closed between them, Barron knew it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something irreversible. That night, Barron walked alone through the campus quad, the air crisp and silent. The world around him looked the same, students rushing, screens glowing, debates echoing from classrooms, but he wasn't the same. There are moments in a person's life that don't shout. They don't come with applause or news coverage or viral videos. Sometimes they arrive quietly across a plastic table, behind prison walls, through the eyes of a man who has lost everything but his dignity. For Barron Trump, the story of David Romero was not a story about guilt. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about awakening, about confronting the terrifying truth that privilege without empathy is blindness, that justice without humanity is just paperwork, and that power, real power, lies not in the ability to rule, but in the courage to remember those the world forgets. Let's keep the conversation going. Subscribe, share, and drop your thoughts below. Your perspective is valuable and might inspire others.